want to finish a little early today if we can. Um, we've actually finished 20b, but I just want to back up a little bit, read the Mishnah again because it will be very helpful to understand what's going on today. So Misham Hareini, so 20b the Mishnah. Misham Hareini Nazir, B'Sham Chaver V'Yamar Ba'ani V'Ani. So a person hears says that he becomes a Nazir, and somebody else hears him and says, "Me too." And another person says, "Me too." Kulam Nazirim. They all become Nazirim. Hutar Harishon Hutar Kulan, but it's like a, think of it as a daisy chain, right? B connects himself to what A did, and C connects himself to what B did. But if A his Nazirus is canceled, like he goes to a sage, and it's determined that he didn't mean it or whatever, his Nazirus doesn't take effect, then all the people depending on his Nazirus also don't take effect. Okay. Which to me is a little surprising. It's like, well, they don't have an excuse, but by explicitly making it contingent on the first guy, so whatever happens to the first guy's Nazirus happens to theirs as well. So okay, I kind of get that. And Hutar Achron, what if if the last guy in the chain, let's say he has his Nazirus canceled, then that doesn't affect the people further up the chain. That makes sense, right? Because they're not dependent on him; he's dependent on them. And then the Mishnah goes through some other cases that we'll get to. What if your wife is involved in this? Then it's complicated because you have the power to annul your wife's neder, but not your own neder, right? So if yours is dependent on hers, the Mishnah says you can't cancel hers because you're effectively canceling your own, which you don't have the authority to do. And then the Gemara started. Let's skip down to the Gemara. Yasir Reish Lakish coming to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Reish Lakish was sitting before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. V'Yasir Kamar Behu Shehit Pisu Kulam B'Toch Kedei Dibur. You know when this counts? When somebody says "and me too," only if they say it right away within the time period of speaking. Well, what does that mean? Kamatok Kedei Dibur Kedei She'el Shalom. Meaning, like if you greet somebody, you say Shalom Aleichem. V'Kamak Kedei She'el Shalom. What kind of greeting? Kedei She'omer Shalom Talmid L'Rav. The greeting that a student would give to his teacher, and that is commonly understood as Shalom Alecha Rabbi. Yeah, hello Rabbi, right? Hello my teacher. So, and the Gemara interprets that as a 3-word interval. Okay, Shalom Alecha Rabbi. So he answered him, well, in that case, you haven't allowed a student who's in this situation to latch on to somebody else's neder. In other words, if A makes a neder and B is about to say "me too," but then his teacher walks into the room, so first he has to say "Shalom Alecha Rabbi," right? And now it's too late, right? He's already passed his 3-word interval. So why this is a problem, I don't know. Like, so what? So you don't give him that chance. Like, big deal. So make your own Nazirus, right? If you want to be a Nazir, so bad. Okay. Tanya, now we'll continue on 21a. We have support for this. We have an explicit brisa that if somebody says I'm a Nazir and his friend heard and says within the speech interval, and says and he says me too. So the first one is has Nazirus, but the second one is not. So in other words, this is not toch kedei dibur, but if you waited for a complete 3-word interval to pass by and then you say me too, it's too late. The me too doesn't apply to anything. It's gone. It's too late. Become a kedei dibur, and here the brisa says explicitly how long is that speech interval? Kedei she'el shalom talmid l'rav. The time for a student to greet his teacher, Shalom Alecha Rabbi, as it's understood. So the 3-word interval. So that's explicit. Now we can try to find some support for Reish Lakish, who is the one that introduced this idea of the 3-word interval. Misham Harein Nazir. Another brisa says someone says I'm a Nazir, somebody else heard and said me too, Ba'ani, and then the third person said me too. Actually, this is our Mishnah, but the Mishnah doesn't say anymore, right? So it should have. So so Reish Lakish is supported here because only like you can have because the Mishnah didn't go on to describe a case where there's more than three in the chain, right? Implying that that would be too long, right? The fourth person is too late. Now you'll notice that the Mishnah only went as far as two, not three. So we'll get to that in a second. So so Mar says, well, that's not a good proof. What is the Mishnah like? Somebody sitting around and gossiping that's going to just use up extra words and phrases and say, well, one person, two persons, three people, four people. Like we don't expect the Mishnah to do that. So the Gemara says, well, all right, but if you want to say the Mishnah is not too wordy, but it does have cases, two people, right? It could have just said the one person in the chain. Why, if it's telling you two people in the chain, it's implying something new with the second person, right? And it doesn't go as far as four, so then we can imply that four is too many. So that's what the Gemara says. So the Mishnah should only say one person saying me too, but it doesn't. It says two people. So Hachanami, the Gemara says, yeah, could have done just one person, and that would have told us what we need to know, that there is such a thing as a chain, right? However, since the end of the Mishnah is going to say Hutar Harishon Hutru Kulan, if the first one is undone, then all of them are undone. Now, all of them implies more than one, right? More than one additional person, right? And Hutar Ha'achron Mutar B'chulan Asurin, and similarly, if the last one has his Naziris removed, then only he is freed from Naziris, but not the ones further up the chain. Miklal, the Ika Emsai, by the use of the word Achron, the last one implies that there's a middle one, right? You've got your first and your last, means it's not first and second, it's first and last, implying there's a middle one. Therefore, the Mishnah follows that style, not that style, but that case, if you will. It follows that case law approach, and it's saying, okay, if we're dealing with that, I'm gonna say in the first clause of the Mishnah, I'm gonna say set it up as three people, the first guy and the two more guys. Okay, so they ask, Chad b'chavrei mitpas or dilma b'kama mitpas. Now, is it a chain, or are they all hanging off of the first guy? Right? That's a good question. So, what would be the difference? If other people can continue to link in a further chain, right? So if I say I'm a Nazir and then you say me too, next guy says me too, you can keep going me too, me too, me too, if you're referring to the guy immediately preceding you, because you're immediately after him, right? You're not, even if a long time and many people have joined in from the time that the original guy took his nether, it doesn't matter, because if you're going by the person directly in front of you, then you're right after him. There's no interval, right? There's no long interval. So if you're saying it's a chain and each one is dependent on his immediate predecessor, so my piece and then we can have a chain that goes on infinitely, right? The common will say, but if you're all joining in, you're all dependent on the first guy, right? Then then you can have only a maximum of three other people, right? Because A starts it off. There's a one-word interval when the second guy says "me too." Me too is one word in Hebrew, okay, va'ani. So we'll think of hashtag me too. All right. So first guy says me too. Now one word interval has passed. The second guy says me too. A second word interval has passed. So the third guy can still say me too, right? But now three me too intervals have passed. So there's no fourth guy if we're all hooking on to the original statement. So how do we roll? Tashma, let's try and prove it. Hareni Nazir, Bryce says our Mishnah again. I'm a Nazir, Vani, and his friend heard and said, me too, Vani, and the next guy says, me too. But it doesn't take a third case, right? So what I just described is you could have three people within the a 3-word interval from the original guy. But the Mishnah only mentions 2 people. So actually, no, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, since it doesn't go doesn't go infinitely, doesn't go as far as 4, then that implies that they're all dependent on the first guy, right? And it's the 3-word interval from the first guy. Might meet us, because if you say that each one is linking to his immediate predecessor, leading to Vavani, so the Mishnah could say, me too, me too, me too, me too, me too, could have 10 people, right? So now Gemara answers again, Tanik ki ruchla lechiv lezel, is the Mishnah like a gossiper? It's going to, just go on and on with this case. So, okay, so Gemara says, all right, if you want to say the Mishnah is economical with its words, why does it even go beyond 1? The principle of hatfasa, the principle of linking to a previous person's acceptance of Nazirus, that principle is demonstrated by a case of 1 person linking, right? So what do you gain by adding in the Mishnah the case of the second person in the chain? So Gemara says, "I did the katane hutarishon hutukul," the same answer we gave before. Since the Mishnah is going to talk about chains of more than 2, and so that you have a middle person that we need to consider. Hutarishon hutukul, hutar achron hutar v'kulan. So we're talking about a last one. Last implies that there was a middle one. Therefore, the Mishnah says, that there's a middle person. That's why it goes with the case of 2 people latching on. Tashma, let's try another proof. If the first one is released from his Nazirus, then all of them that depend on him are released as well. Rishon Hudasharu. So the Mishnah says it's only when the first guy is released. But what about if the second guy is released, right? So does that prove? So the Mishnah does not say that everybody beyond him is released. So doesn't that imply that all the people beyond him are really dependent on the original guy and not on the ones in the chain, the intervening chain? Shmami no become piecing. That proves that they're all hooking on to the original guy. Why says no, you could still say that each one is dependent on the one immediately preceding him. Since we're going to say, this is again the same answer we get here. Since we're going to say that once one is released, all of them are released. So if you want to use the language of all of them, then if the Mishnah had picked the middle guy to be the one that's released from his nether, so that doesn't apply to everybody. It only applies to people further down the chain, not up the chain, right? So that's the reason that the Mishnah is dealing with the first guy, because it wants to use the language of all of them. All of the subsequent people are released. And then if the middle guy is released, then the first guy would not be released. That's why it's talking about the first one, to tell you the case where all of the others. It's not such a great answer either, right? Because the Mishnah could have been more specific, but I guess we're kind of taking the approach that the Mishnah is being economical with its words. Tashma. Here's another proof, again from our Mishnah, the case of Hutar ha'achron mutar v'kulan asuri. If the last one is released from his Nazirus, then only he is released, and the ones further up, all of the ones further up the chain are still Nazir. So the Mishnah is talking about only the last one, meaning the last one, there's nobody after him, right? But maybe if the middle guy is released from his nether, maybe maybe the last one would also be released. So it teaches us that that each one is dependent on the one immediately preceding. It's just the same thing. Maybe I could still say they're all dependent on the first guy. And what does the last one mean? And so it means the next one, right? And this is actually in biblical Hebrew. There's a couple of examples of this where the use of the term acharon, which we translate usually as last, doesn't mean last, means the latter one, right? The next one in line. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean the last one. The Ida the Tana Risha and Tana Achron, since it's just a matter of style. Like, why are we using the term Acharon? Because Acharon is kind of a counterpart to Rishon, to the first, but it doesn't really necessarily mean the last guy. It means the next guy in line. Okay. Tashma, the Tanya Beheka. Now let's bring a proof from a different brisa. Hutra Harishon, Hutru Kula. It's going to be stated explicitly. The first guy is released, and they're all released. Hutar Achron, if the last one is released, Achron, Hutar Kula Nazir. The last one is released, but everybody else is still a Nazir. Hutar Emsai. Now it's going to be specific. This brisa says, what about if the middle guy is released? Then Hutar Hemenu Ulamata Mutar. Anybody below him in the chain is released. And anybody above him in the chain, Hemenu Ulamala, so anybody above him is not released. Okay, so then this conclusively proves that they're not all dependent on the original guy. They're dependent on the guy before them in the chain. That's why if somebody in the middle breaks the chain, everybody below him is released, but people above him are not released. They're dependent on the people above him. Okay, so Gemara is finally satisfied with that proof. Okay, Harani Nazir, next part of the Mishnah. Somebody says, I'm a Nazir. So his friend says, my just as, I mean, what he's saying is my mouth is like his mouth, meaning just as he's forbidden to eat grapes and drink wine, me too, right? Or just as he's forbidden to cut his hair, my hair too. Okay, so then, hooray. So Gemara says that person is a Nazir. So Gemara questions him. Like, why is that? Raminu, I'll bring you a contrary source. Yadi Nazira, Baragli Nazir. What if a person says, my hand is a Nazir, my foot is a Nazir, right? Lomer Klum, this is meaningless, right? Because there's no such, it doesn't have any, it doesn't make any sense. Roshi Nazira, Kavedi Nazir, but if you say my head is a Nazir or my liver is a Nazir, Hare is a Nazir, then that does work. You are a Nazir. Zaklal, what's the principle? If it's something that you can't live without, right? You can't live without your head. So if you say my head is a Nazir, we understand referring to your whole being, right? You say my finger is a Nazir, you could live without a finger. So that has no meaning. Now what the Gemara is asking is, well, you can live without your hair. You can live without your lips, let's say, or your mouth. I mean, I don't know how you live without your mouth, but let's go with the hair. You can live without your hair. So why, if you say my hair is a Nazir, does that count? I see. Explaining the Mishnah as I explained it originally. What he's saying is, my mouth is forbidden from wine just like his mouth. And that is a valid acceptance of Nazirus. So he's not saying my mouth is a Nazir. He's saying my mouth is subject to the restrictions of Nazirus, and that implies the whole taking on the whole package. Usari kisaro milomos, and the same thing with the hair. Like you're taking on my hair, I'm not allowing it to be cut like a Nazir, and so you're taking on the whole package. Okay, next part of the Mishnah. Harein Nazir. If a woman says I'm a Nazir, Mishama Balav Yamar Vandi, and her husband chains onto her, right? He says, me too. Okay, he can't annul her Nazirus. Okay, so Gemara is going to explore this a little bit. They ask, so when the husband annuls the nether, is he completely like revoking it retroactively, like completely uprooting it like it never was? Or maybe he's just cutting it off. Like, at 8 o'clock in the morning, your wife says, she's becoming a Nazir, and then at 10 o'clock you find out and say, no way, I'm annulling it, right? What happened between 8 and 10? Is she considered a Nazir, or retroactively do we say this was never enforced? What's the difference? Isha Nazir, if a woman becomes a Nazir, and her friend heard and said, me too, and the husband of the first one annuls it. So if he's retroactively canceling it, so the second woman is also canceled, right? There was never Nazirus. She's also permitted. The Megas Gaias, but if you're saying from now on it's cut off, so Ish So it doesn't, in fact, the friend who said me too, she she attached herself to a Nazirus that remains valid. True, the original person stopped being a Nazir, but it doesn't affect the fact that at the time that the person said "me too," their friend said "me too," that was still a valid Nazirus, and that's not retroactively canceled. So how do we roll? Tashma, let's try and prove it. Harin Nazira, person says I'm a Nazir, a woman. V'shama Baal V'Amar and their husband says "me too." Any Yachalafer, he can't cancel it. Esau Gadol Baal Miga's guy is now. Why can't he cancel it? Because he's be canceling his own Nazirus, right? But if you want to say that the annulment just cuts it off from now on, so it should be the same thing as we just said, right? That sure, the woman is off the hook, but when he said "me too," he's attaching himself to a Nazirus that's still valid. So that doesn't that prove that what we're actually doing is uprooting it altogether? Retroactively. Versus what the Omega's guys. Well, you can still say it's only from now on, and it's canceled. Yeah, you're right. Really, he should be able to. The husband should be able to cancel her Nazirus to annul it behind the time for why not? Why don't we allow it? Since it says "me too," because by saying "me too," he is affirming it. Okay, once he's affirmed it, he can't go back and annul it. Okay, so by saying "me too," he not only accepts it for himself, but he signals that he approves. So imishtil ahakamoso melti mefar. But there is a way out. If you appeal, if you have your cancellation, if you go to a chacham and say, "Look, I didn't realize, the consequences of what I was doing. I shouldn't have affirmed it. I didn't mean it." And so if the affirmation is annulled, then the "me too" can be annulled as well. Okay, Tashma. So we don't have a proof yet, right? So like we could go either way. It could be that it's retroactively canceled, or it's canceled from now on. And the proof from the husband saying "me too" and then not being able to annul it is because it could be for other reasons. So Tashma, let's try and prove it somewhere else. Let's say a woman became a Nazir and she set aside the animal that she's going to sacrifice at the end of the Nazirus, right? So now we have Kachim involved. Now we have the sacrificial stuff. And then the husband annuls it, right? So it all takes place on the same day. I'm going to be a Nazir. Here's the cow, or I can't remember what animal she brings. But here's the cow I'm going to use at the end of my Nazirus as a sacrifice, right? And then the husband says, "It's not on my watch. I'm canceling. I'm annulling your Nazirus." What happens to the animal? Im shalo haisa habehema. If the animal was the husband's property, then it just goes back to the regular. Go out to the field with the other animals. There's nothing sacred about it. But if it was her property, a chatas tamus. So the chatas offering has to be left to die because you can't do anything with it. You can't bring it. There's no Nazirus anymore to bring it, but you can't cancel it anymore. Now, if you want to say it's retroactively canceled when the husband annuls it, so there was never any Nazirus. So the designation of the animal as a Nazir sacrifice doesn't apply anymore, right? The animal should just be a regular animal again. So that indicates that the Nazirus is only canceled from here on. Where it says, no, you could still say it's retroactively canceled. Why do we leave the chatas to die? Since the wife doesn't need the atonement anymore, right? It's like she did it when she set it aside, and now she's doesn't require it anymore because she's not a Nazir. So we have a special category with regard to a chatas offering, that a chatas whose owner died, then and that the rule for that is that it has to be left to die. Okay, so even though the Nazirus is retroactively canceled because this was a chatas and it was once designated as a chatas, and now it's got nobody to offer, to offer it anymore as a chatas. It's like it's in that category. That's why, even though we can say the Nazirus is canceled, since it was once a chatas, always a chatas, even if turns out there's no sin to atone for. Tashma. So let's try another proof. So a woman became a Nazir, and then she violated her Nazir. She drank wine. She was in contact with the dead. So she gets lashes. How does this work? If it's a case where there was no annulment, right? So like, hello, like what's the no kidding? She gets lashes. What are you even telling us, right? Obviously, she violated her vow. So it's like any other violation of a mitzvah. Do you have to tell us? So it must be that that she became a Nazir. She drank wine. Same day, her husband annuls it. So then, is she liable for punishment for drinking the wine? Right? If we say it's a retroactive cancellation, so in the end, she did nothing wrong because there never was any Nazirus in the end. So drinking wine was not a problem. So it looks like it only cancels it from now on. It says, no, you can still say it's retroactive. Because the next part of that brisa, which the Gemara held back from us, but the next part says, what if she didn't know? Okay, like she's drinking wine, and the owner, the husband cancels the Nazirus, but she doesn't know that he canceled it, and she keeps drinking wine. So she keeps on violating her Nazirus, which is no longer valid. Then she doesn't get lashes. So so the reason that the Mishnah told her, this Brisa told us that she's liable for lashes in the first instance is it's just a setup case. It's right. It's to bring us to the case of where she doesn't know. Like the basic case is, that she knew about the cancellation. No, 1 second. The basic case is, she knew about the cancellation, and she gets lashes. So it's obvious, but it's only a setup case, right? The reason that we're setting it up that way is to tell us what if she didn't know, then she doesn't get the lashes because then she's then she is more of a less. Okay, so we'll stop here, and I'm not going to be available tomorrow, so David's going to fill in for me tomorrow.
Okay, Dov. Thank you. See you soon.
Bye.
You too.